I ended up, selling all my cryptocurrency, which I had saved up in Bitcoin. I think I made like 75 bucks. Well, I went back probably about 3 months ago and looked, and that would have been like $1,800 of Bitcoin.
Hey, this is Eric with Wilson Mining. I'm here with Zach, one of our customers for our Bitcoin mining immersion tank. And I thought I'd come by and drop it off. A little far away, but I got no problem making the drive. It's good to meet you.
Good to meet you as well.
So my first question is, of course, just like everyone else, is what was your Bitcoin journey? How did it start?
I knew of Bitcoin very early on, but despite my interest in technology, I didn't really get into mining any early Bitcoin. Cryptocurrency kind of caught me probably, I'd say 2013 or so, about the time that Bitcoin ASICs were starting to hit the market and GPUs were becoming unprofitable for Bitcoin. And at that point, some other altcoins were starting to step up to the plate, like Litecoin. And so I went out, bought myself a GPU for my new gaming computer, and used that as an excuse.
Like most did.
Like most did. But I figured, I can mine cryptocurrency 24/7 and game on this computer when I'm not mining. So I'll pay it off in no time at all. Well, it didn't turn out to be as profitable as I had hoped. I ended up, selling all my cryptocurrency, which I had saved up in Bitcoin. I think I made like 75 bucks. Well, I went back probably about 3 months ago and looked, and that would have been like $1,800 of Bitcoin. And I just held on to it. But you can't predict the future. So
why are you looking to mine Bitcoin?
Yeah, so despite that setback, I've stayed pretty close to cryptocurrency for a while. I've used Bitcoin as a payment system for various things, be it VPN clients or other needs. But I never really held on to a lot of it. Probably in the last year or so, as we kind of turned to COVID, I started stacking up Satoshis and thinking, this is probably something I want to make part of my investment portfolio. So I'm looking at various cryptocurrencies as investments, but I'm also very into the technology behind them, very into the blockchain technology and the kind of innovations that it can bring to, just everyday life. So I've also gotten into some other promising looking altcoins, not necessarily from a financial perspective, but from a technical perspective. So I also play with those a little bit, but I really got down to thinking, maybe mining Bitcoin at home is something that's an attainable practice. So I set out and looked at, what S19 ASICs were going for. And at the time they were $10K a piece, and out of my reach, a little more than I was ready to spend. But with the recent downturn in the market and ASICs getting cheaper, I realized these are in the range of affordable if I can make financial sense. So with my other cryptocurrencies, I run that as a business, and as such, I can use tax deductions for utilities and use depreciation on my assets and kind of play with my taxes a little bit to my advantage in that way. So I started looking at Bitcoin and how I can make financial sense. Yeah. And with residential electrical rates, and my rates are pretty decent, but I still can't make it extremely profitable. So I was like, it doesn't make sense even at this time to go with Bitcoin. So that's kind of where I was until I started stumbling on Immersion.
Yeah, that is a hole to go down.
And when you start looking at technologies like Immersion, that really changes your outlook on this. Instead of, okay, I'm going to spend my residential electricity to produce Bitcoin, I realized there were some folks out there like Coin Heated in Michigan who was using his S19s to heat a pool in the middle of winter, and in doing so was able to overclock his S19s, run them harder, and also stay profitable. I live in a very old house, 202 years old. We don't have central heat. We don't have central air. In the summertime, I throw air conditioning units in the windows. In the wintertime, we have hot water radiators, those old iron ones.
Yeah.
So
those are real old school.
They are real old school, but the heat they put off is just very nice. It's very comfortable. It's not blowing dust around the house like a central air system would. So I started thinking, well, if somebody can use a Bitcoin miner in an immersion bath to send heat to a pool, I could turn that same system into sending heat to my boiler system.
Yeah.
And instead of running the boilers, I could heat my house over the winter.
Yeah.
And so I started looking down that plan and seeing what I could do with that. So that's what led me to kind of where we are today. So right now, the boiler itself is a 41,000 BTU boiler, but it's got a set point at, I think, no higher than 140 degrees. And that's important for me because I've got little kids running around. I can't have them burning themselves on the iron radiators.
Yeah.
So the way it works is when the thermostat calls for heat, the boiler kicks on, starts producing heat, and starts heating up all the water in the loop. Now, it heats up very slowly because the circulator pump's constantly bringing cooled water back and sending hot water out to the radiators. But it will never break 140 degrees, which means the surface of the radiators never really gets above about 120. Okay. So that was kind of also within my target space in this design was I need something that can send heat to the radiators and radiate it into the rooms because the radiators will radiate any heat above ambient.
Yeah.
But I also don't want to burn any kids or anything.
Yeah. So how did you go about learning to put a system like this together?
Yeah, so obviously drawing inspiration from YouTube videos like Coin Heated and others, I found quite a few people who were heating their house with Bitcoin miners, but very few who had hot water systems. So there were guys who would, put a miner in a box in the attic and run ducts into their ducting and just push the heat into their ducts during the winter.
Oh, for like a central air type scenario.
Right, like a central air scenario.
But you don't have that.
But I don't have that. That doesn't work for me. So I started digging around and trying to find ideas or ways this could work. And one of the places that I found a lot of inspiration was in the outdoor wood fire boiler community.
Okay.
Those that it's a like a small shed you stand up, you load it full of wood, burn that, and you produce heat, which boils water in a jacket around the fire, and then you circulate that water into your house. As I dug into that, I found more and more ways to move heat from one place to another and exchange it between various mediums, whether it's liquid to liquid or liquid to air. In addition to that, most of the parts that work for their setups work for my setup.
It's funny how that works.
Yeah.
It's pretty similar setup. And then I guess, do you have any plans to expand? Because I think you're starting with an 8 miner tank.
Yep. So I've got an 8 miner tank. I've got 4 miners today. I've got overclocking power supplies on the way, which means I can play with how much heat they produce based on the season or based on my needs. As with a lot of these things, there's no manual for this. There's no guides that tell you if you want X, do Y.
Yeah.
It's a lot of experimentation. So I bought the 8 miner tank from Wilson Mining because I thought if I need to add more capacity, if I need to add more miners, I'll do that. But that kind of puts me right about the limit of what my electrical panel can handle.
Yeah.
So
I think because you're at 400 amp service, I believe you said.
I have a 400 amp service with dual 200 amp panels.
Yeah.
So my house runs off one panel, the miners run off another.
Okay.
But with that, I figure I'll run on somewhere between 4 to 8 miners, and then in the future, I do have some plans to expand. Right now, the heat is going for domestic hot water. It's going for the hydronic heating system within the house. That's the oil boiler. Then I'm also sending excess heat after that out to a 14,000 gallon saltwater pool. So it'll heat that in the winter, mostly just as an overflow for excess heat to keep the miners cool and happy. I've got the capability to add a dry cooler down the line if summertime temperatures are too high. And all of these various mechanisms have bypass valves such that I could turn on or off different sections during different seasons.
Okay.
But in the future, I plan on rolling out a large amount of solar and offsetting my bill that way. And then in the future, when I build my workshop, I'll be putting another tank in the workshop with more miners on a separate power feed. And by doing that, I'll run radiant floors for heat and possibly even a snow melt system in the wintertime.
With your solar setup, are you planning to have a battery?
So I've gone back and forth on that at various stages. Obviously, I lean more towards having an off-grid setup as opposed to a grid tie setup. So here where I'm at, we don't have a decent net metering plan. That is to say, if I overproduce on my solar and try and push it back to the grid, they pay me pennies on the dollar for what I produce versus what I use.
Yeah, so it's way more worth it for you to keep all of it.
It's way more worth it for me to keep all of it. That said, currently with battery technology where it is, it's somewhat costly to install a large battery system.
Yeah.
And personally, my electrical needs are strange in that I have a large number of computers and servers that do tasks for me. So I naturally have a high, very constant demand.
Yeah.
When I add the Bitcoin miners on top of that, that would do the same thing. So sizing a battery capable of running so many miners and computers, it's probably out of my range.
Yeah.
But that said, I can take the same money that I would put into battery technology and overbuild my solar production capacity.
Yeah.
As long as I don't exceed what my miners and computers can use at any given moment, like during peak sun, then I'm essentially running them on solar during peak sun.
We've looked at wind, and the one problem we had was the inconsistencies of it. How do you, but you're also, obviously you're tied to the grid too, so how do you control the solar power powering the miners and the grid power?
Yeah, so the easy way to do that is by using an off-grid inverter in zero export mode, such that you're basically running your utility power through your inverter and feeding your loads from that. And then as the sun comes up and power starts to be produced, that's jointly feeding your loads with less and less grid power needed.
So the inverter controls how much it's taking from the grid? So how does it actually work?
So basically what you're doing is you're turning the DC from the panels into AC for your loads.
Yeah.
And AC will always flow to where it's needed. In the case of a grid tie inverter, that means it'll flow back onto the grid to your neighbor's house to power his lights. If your inverter supports zero export, it will never send power back to the grid. It will only ever take from the grid.
Oh, interesting. Because that is one, I guess, consideration we never had was how we're actually going to do that.
Yeah.
Because I think there are some guys that have a small scale, like they have a little windmill that we've seen on like Twitter or something. They had like a 12 kilowatt windmill, and then he just very briefly said that it was like, so how do you control that? He didn't really go into detail. So I would assume he's using an inverter then. Okay. So what is your technical background, I guess? Because a lot of people have, some people don't have experience doing this stuff, but you sound like you do. So what is your background?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit of a jack of all trades. I get into a little bit of everything. As you've seen, we've spent a good portion of time soldering copper pipe and doing plumbing and electrical work, and there's very little that I won't just jump into.
Yeah.
So I'll sit down, I'll watch some YouTube videos, I'll learn how to do something, or I'll find somebody who knows how to do it and will teach me. But technology has always been one of those things that I just kind of picked up on my own. So I started doing computers back when I was in high school. I turned that into a job throughout college, and then got into the IT industry and worked my way, up through the ranks more or less. Now I do computer and architecture design for cloud systems for customers. So it's just been one of those things that throughout that whole journey, I've always kind of maintained a little lab space here in the house where I can run old enterprise hardware, tinker with it, try new stuff out. And cryptocurrency's generally been a part of that throughout time. Now, obviously, with the Ethereum merge having closed up, that's kind of brought an end to some of those. But there are others out there that are still either interesting on a technical level or intriguing on an investment level. So I still do a little bit here and there.
So how did you discover our immersion mining tank?
Yeah, so obviously as I'm doing research on the internet, I'm a little bit of everywhere. I'm watching a lot of YouTube videos. I'm scouring Reddit for resources, and ironically, I did stumble across your initial setup where you had bought miners and published that onto a Reddit link, and I was quite excited for you, a little bit jealous. That led me over to the world of Telegram immersion mining groups, of which there are several. And I think you threw an invite out that I followed along, and and kind of fell into a group where there's a lot of these guys just out there mining at their homes or making businesses out of it.
Yeah.
And it's just such a neat community because you don't find a lot of communities that are just so willing to share information.
Yeah.
Like guys that'll just jump on a call with you and explain something to you, or will post you, links to go read this thing to understand a particular concept. Or, even for those of us who haven't done a lot of research and are just kind of starting that journey, there's a lot of people out there willing to help you when you just ask a silly question like, what dry cooler should I get? And it's an environment that really teaches you how to further research, because when you ask a question like that, the answer is going to be, well, it depends. So that environment, those folks that are out there doing that, they really do a great job of teaching people how to learn for themselves. So they'll say what you need to look at is, something in this size range, because given your loads, you're going to be producing this much heat, you're going to be trying to get rid of this much. So it's just kind of a neat thing that led me down that path. Obviously, I was looking for an immersion tank, and I had attempted to buy one from another vendor. There were some response issues in that, and at that time, Wilson Mining had just released their 8-miner tank. And so I said to him, I'd love to buy a tank from you, but I just can't right now. I'm trying to get this other tank. And you said, I'll tell you what, swing the shipping, send me the gas money, and I'll drive it out and help you set it up. And I was like, I'd be a fool not to take you up on that. So here we are. It's been a great day having you at my house, just talking and chatting while we work on setting things up. We're not all the way there yet, but we will get there, and we'll make sure that we can kind of share all the information we can along that journey. Hopefully, help some other people find out things that they're looking for.
Yeah, that's the one thing, because I started with a guy. We're both part of that, our Telegram channel. And, I started right where, I guess you probably had more experience when you started than I did. I started with nothing. And then I'm similar to what you said is, one of the other guys helped me out. I asked him a question. He said, hey, this is where you'd find that information. It is quite a neat community.
It is.
Right. So for those that are starting with no knowledge at all, or, just looking to start something new, how would you recommend going about just, I guess, getting started?
That is a tough one. And I'd say it's a tough one mostly based on, it depends on scale. It depends on if you're looking to immerse one miner and run it in your house, or if you're thinking about making this a business with, 20 to start. And there are similarities in both of those journeys. Your first thing to do, I think, is get involved with the community. Start, if nothing else, start lurking in the Telegram groups and watching the conversations go by, because you can learn a lot even just by watching the questions that others ask. And that's something that I certainly did. I gained a lot of knowledge just by watching other people ask the dumb questions that I was too scared to ask, and then reaping the benefit of the answers they got. So I think if you're just starting out, it can be a daunting thing to take on. I think there's very few of us out there that have built fully running working systems on the small scale. On the commercial scale, there's more, but you're also not as able to find ready information on that scale, because the folks that are doing it also want to keep their competitive advantage. They're
not sharing that.
Some of them can be good and share information, but at the same time, they're not giving away any secret sauce. So I think for the small miner, for the home miner, sitting, watching conversations go by, asking pertinent questions, I think that's going to be your greatest amount of benefit. I think other than that, also figure out kind of what your scale is. Figure out what you want to do, how many miners you want to mine with, and most of all, why you want to mine with those miners. Are you after the Bitcoins? Do you have cheap electricity? Or is it something more like what I'm doing, where I'm trying to harvest the heat byproduct as my primary concern? Because I think all of that kind of informs which way you dive into this. Obviously, I went with a fully custom system. There are other more out-of-the-box systems out there, but one of the things that was important for me was over-engineering my system such that if I had to make changes in the future, I wouldn't be left with weak links in the chain.
Yeah.
So part of that was buying one of the Wilson Mining stainless steel tanks. I wanted something American made. I wanted something sturdy that I knew would last. Obviously, I could have saved money. I could have gone with any number of tanks from overseas companies. But really, I wanted to focus on making sure my components were good and right and strong in case I need to change something in the future. Maybe my heat exchangers are too small, maybe they're too big, maybe my pump flows too fast. I wanted to make sure that whatever I built it to be adjustable so that I can make changes in the future if my calculations were wrong, which I'm certain some of them are.
Yeah, I mean, we built ours. I was no engineer when I started.
Yeah.
His calculations are well above me.
Yeah, and I think a large part of this is I really want to get into this. I really want to log as much data from this as I can, because I think as much information as I've taken from the community, I'd like to be able to give some information back, such that, if you're running, 12 kilowatts of heat and your pump is moving this many gallons per minute, expect that this heat exchanger can do a delta of X degrees.
Yeah.
Like, if I can chart that information and provide it back to the community, then that's sure to help somebody, I'm sure.
Yeah. So how are you monitoring all these temperatures?
Yeah. So that's a great question. When I originally started out, I was kind of diving into this system based off some information I had. I'd seen some people use like large 2-inch CPVC with saddles and thermal wells to get a temperature probe basically in the line of flow. I bought some of those components. They're costly, and I ended up putting those on the shelf and not actually using them. As it stands right now, I've built most of my loop out of M-wall copper, which is a thinner kind of copper tubing. It's really good for home heating. That's what I've got in my existing system. But one of the benefits that gives me is I can actually attach temperature probes almost to the outside of the tubing and get a pretty reasonable heat reading within a couple of minutes of the change. So I figure, depending on my interval of temperature monitoring, over a 5 to 10 second range, you're not going to notice the difference between it being on the outside of the pipe and reading the actual fluid temperature. But then I'll set up a number of little one-wire monitors connected to just a little ESP board, and I'll send all that data over Wi-Fi back to probably an InfluxDB with Grafana, and be able to track all my temperatures and see when I make a change. When I turn my pump up more, my temperatures do this. When I turn my pump down, my temperatures do that. If I add colder water to the loop, this happens. So
you're getting the full data set.
Oh yeah.
That's some valuable information.
I'm going to draw some data out of this, because in the future, I figure once I've figured out what changes to the system cause certain reactions, then I can start getting into further automating the system. So I can start changing pump speeds to match the weather, or alter my flow rate to bring the temperature in the house where I want it to be.
Yeah, that's pretty technical.
Yeah, well, this is what I do.
I suppose you're right. How do you make it all work together?
Yeah,
I am by no means a software guy.
No, that's fair. With data, the first thing is collecting the data in a meaningful manner. So I've got a number of temperature probes that can report that data as time-stamped time flow data and give me that over time. Obviously, I need all those timestamps to match, such that if I look at my pump data and my pipe temperature data and my heat exchanger data, they all synchronize to whatever event is currently happening. Obviously, with that, I'll also have to gather other external data sources, things like ambient temperature outside. I've got my pool up and running. The pool water will be circulating through one of the heat exchangers, so I'm going to want to monitor my pool temperature and my flow rate on the pool. Once I've got all that data and I've collected all of that into some sort of time series database, then I can easily graph all that out together in a visual way, or start to determine what impact certain events have. So, for instance, the pool pump will run at a very low flow rate 24/7, but during the day it will ramp up when it's filtering the pool, or if I'm doing something like vacuuming the pool. So when that happens, that's obviously going to cause some sort of change in the system.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that whatever change in the system I cause, I can quantify that, and I know what kind of impact that has on the miners. For the most part, most of the sudden changes like that will probably not be a negative impact. As long as the miners don't get shocked with a lot of cool cold oil too bad, I think they'll be okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of that's still tomorrow stuff that I'll mess with once I kind of get everything up and running. I want to get it up, get it stable, get it running, and then go to really drawing the data out of the system.
Yeah. I guess since Bitcoin miners, I mean, they're a great source of heat, do you think that might be a potential, I guess, thing that would become more common?
That's a good question. I've seen several times where a company claimed to bring to market the latest and greatest Bitcoin heater.
Yeah.
And every time, most of the people who know Bitcoin kind of laugh at that, because inevitably it's a heater that mines Bitcoin, but it does one of those things very poorly.
Yeah.
And yes, Bitcoin miners are phenomenal heaters. That cannot be argued, because all computers are phenomenal heaters.
Yeah.
The closer your power factor gets to 1, the better your watt to heat translation is. And so computers with very high power factors, like Bitcoin miners, are going to produce about as much heat as they use in electricity. So if you figure this is a 3,000 watt Bitcoin miner, and you figure my hair dryer is 1,500 watts, you're running 2 hair dryers all the time.
That's a lot of heat.
That's a lot of heat. Depending on where you want it, it might be to your advantage, or it might be kind of an annoyance. So if it's summertime, you probably don't want to dump that heat into your house.
Yeah.
But I think it's something that this idea of a Bitcoin heater, it's a tough sell, because the technology marches forward so quickly that it's really going to be hard to package that down to the point that you've got a simple appliance that the common person would want.
The other thing, the noise issue too. If you're air cooled, the fans are such an issue.
Yes, and I think that's really what brings immersion to play.
Yeah.
I don't see very many ways to run a Bitcoin heater on air. The exception being, if you can put it far enough away but still bring the heat in with ducting or something to where you want it, but still it's making noise somewhere.
Yeah.
So your garage is annoyingly unbearable now. So for those of us who are tinkerers, those of us who aren't afraid to cut a hole in the side of their air handler, or or put a new ceiling duct in with a fan to another room where your Bitcoin miners sit, I think for that niche community, there will always be room for Bitcoin powered heat.
Yeah. We all want to mine Bitcoin, but we all want it to make sense.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense if we're not making any money on it.
Right.
And so the one way to make money is, like you mentioned, is you can use it, produce heat, and that saves you X amount of dollars. But ultimately, it has to make sense.
Yeah. It has to make sense. And right now in the bear market, these might be a break-even proposition. But a break-even proposition is a hard sell for the wife, who sees this as a several $1,000 investment that generates pennies a day. So if I can create a secondary use, something like heat generation, where I no longer have to buy fuel oil to keep my house and family warm over the winter, now I've offset that cost almost completely.
Yeah.
So if I'm just breaking even on the electric to Bitcoin cost, but I'm getting fuel as a byproduct, or heat as a byproduct, and saving on fuel, now I've reached a point where this is feasible again.
Yeah. Have you done the math? Like, do you think you'll be able to almost completely turn off your heater and just use the Bitcoin miners?
So based on my calculations on the math with overclocked miners, I'm so worried that I'm going to produce too much heat that I actually went out and bought a 14,000 gallon pool and stood it up in October, such that I've got an overflow for excess heat. So that's how convinced I am that I can probably produce too much heat. Yeah. And if I'm wrong, I bought an 8 miner tank for only 4 miners, so that I can double my capacity within a week's notice if it gets really cold around here.